Good morning. I just wanted to say a couple of words before we actually begun. And I'm also going to try to tell you a joke, because that'll be the only funny thing about this worship service, I hope. I'm very, very grateful to the worship committee for asking me to fill this slot today. And I'm also grateful to Eddie Freed for last week's service, which I found inspiring and helped me put together what I'm going to be talking about today. Worship is a lot of things to a lot of people. Some years ago, I think it was when we were having all those meetings, when we were getting ready to call our first settled minister, the question was asked in this big group setting about what worship is. And I think it was Dave Morkel who said, well, worship should be an experience that helps you get through the week nicely and safely. And I always remember that, and I think that is what it is. And I hope that we're continuing to do that as a community together. Now for the joke. Okay. As many of you know, my brother is a professional comedian. He suggested this. Okay, so there's an elderly couple. They live in a town where it's raining very hard and it's starting to flood. So after a while, a raft comes up to their house and some folks get out and they say to them, come, let us take you to safety. And the old man of the couple says, no, no, go save somebody else. God will provide for us. And so they leave. It's getting worse, and the water is up to the first floor, and they're now in their bedroom looking out the window. A rowboat comes pulling up to the window, and the men say, hop out, we'll take you to safety. And the old woman says, no, no, go save someone else. God will provide. And so they do. Later on, they're up on their roof. The water is about to engulf them. A helicopter comes. A ladder is dropped down. A voice says, come, get on the rope ladder, we'll take you to safety. The old man says, no, no, go save someone else. God will provide. Later on, the water is up to their noses. It looks like all is lost. The old woman looks up to heaven and says, God, why have you forsaken us? Why have you forsaken us? A voice comes down and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I sent you a raft, a rowboat, and a helicopter, and you didn't want it. You're on your own. We're ready to move on.
Next, yes.
Here I am, God. Here I am. Here I am with the dishes in the sink, the dust on the shelves, the skin on my hands, which is drying out and starting to crack. My appetite has gone without any other bodies to remind my body of itself. I can pray for salvation, but my bones know this is all there is. This is the day God has given us to live in. There is no heaven, child, no heaven apart from the dishes and dust and the skin on your hands. If you want heaven, this is what you have to work with. You who are a child of the Creator, God has given you all she can. Pay attention. And Mr. Kelly, Matthew Kelly, is a kind of new age Christian. If you Google him, you'll see he's got a lot of stuff. If you Google, why am I here? There are millions of entries. You could never go through all of them. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on that. Mr. Kelly believes that you're doing your best to do your best every day. Forgive yourself when you're unable to, but just keep doing it until your days are done. And it'll make the world a better place. And I was going to go with that until things changed in the world. And so how do you do those things if you have no place to live? How do you be the best you can be if you don't have any food? How do you be the best that you can be if you have no hope? I don't get that. And I think that this experience that we're all going through highlights it. And in a lot of ways, it's our own fault. We've allowed this to be. A lot of it is predicated, I'm sorry to say, on what seems to be the negative part of human nature. I don't know if you knew this, but in 1492, Queen Isabella said, "No more Jews in my country." And they all had to leave. "Oh yeah, but if you convert to Catholicism, we'll let you stay." Except that the Inquisition came a couple of years later and they decided to kill all of those folks too. History is filled with mean people doing mean things that make no sense. I don't know if any of you are old enough. I know Ann Summers knows this because of what she does. Franklin Roosevelt gave this speech prior to World War II saying that we were going to go into the war to protect the four freedoms, the four universal freedoms: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Well, how are we doing? I don't think we're doing so good. When I was a kid, I grew up a fearful child. I grew up a fearful child because I believed that the Nazis were going to come and get us. I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to happen, but the adults in my life talked about it as though it might be very soon. And I didn't really know what I ought to do about it. I couldn't really hate them. I didn't know who they were. I just knew they were coming. And it's a burden that many Jewish young people faced. It was a time in the early 50s. I had neighbors who survived the camps. They talked about our world as being in imminent danger. And I grew up with that fear. It went underground, I guess, as time went on, and I lived my life and kind of forgot about it a little bit. I didn't follow the Jewish faith in my adulthood, and eventually my wife and I found our way to being Unitarian Universalists. And one of the things about being a Unitarian Universalist for me was I didn't have to be Jewish. I was able to let go of that burden, and I felt okay in a way that I didn't even realize I felt badly about before. It was very strange. And that's one type of fear. I have a friend, his name is Charlie. Charlie has intense anxiety about living in the world. He has a hard time doing lots of things. Holding a job proved difficult. Having a family was stressful, but he did it. And over the years, the way he learned to cope was to believe it was him, not us, right? It was him, not us, that there was something wrong with. And if he just fixed himself, everything would be okay. And he's worked at that pretty hard for a long time. Now, with the coronavirus going on, his internal state matches everyone else's. And when we talk now, it's like talking to a different person. And he readily says, misery loves company. Again, he's another person who lived in fear of what might befall him, even though he couldn't exactly identify what it was. On April 11th, I lost a good friend, an old friend. Her name was Debbie Korchinski. She died of corona. She was otherwise healthy. She died alone in a hospital room on a ventilator. I can't imagine she was anything but frightened. It's just terrible. Now, a lot of people would say, well, we had this pandemic, like what could we have done? Well, we could have done a lot of things, at least in my opinion. I believe we could have learned from the lessons of the past, followed the warning signs, make society a place where everyone feels valued. You heard last week from Eddie, and I'd like to build on that just a little bit. I don't know if some of you may remember, there was a book called The Other America. It was written by Michael Harrington. It exposed, which is a funny word, the underbelly of a very modern, upwardly mobile America that was poor, had no health care, died at an early age, and in other words, lived a bad life, and a lot of them lived in Appalachia. It caused a tremendous sensation. There was a special on channel 2 or 4 or whatever it was, and people wrung their hands and wondered what they were going to do. Well, what did they do? You know, what happened? Did we do anything to relieve the poverty in this country? Did we do anything to ameliorate the environmental risks that those people lived under? Yeah, we passed some laws, and laws were unpassed. And we are at great risk environmentally. And we've left our most vulnerable, which is now many more of us than it was before, at risk. And again, there are other examples of the same thing. When Harry Truman became president, he talked about having health insurance for all the old people. Well, it took a bunch of years until Lyndon Johnson got that passed. Harry Truman was still alive to see it, but that still left many people uncared for. President Johnson instituted this program called the Great Society, where we were going to lift everybody out of poverty. How's that worked out? Not too well. When the Clintons came into office, forgive me for conflating Hillary and Bill, they tackled healthcare. They were laughed at, and they dropped it. When President Obama came along, the big centerpiece of his healthcare legislation was the public option. Where is it? What happened? He let it go. When it came time to try to undo the economic disaster we were living in, when President Obama first became president, he let the bankers, the big bankers, go because he was afraid that putting them in jail would somehow ruin the economy. Well, I guess we could look back on that and see where we are right now. It's very sad, but sad in a way that also makes me angry because we let that happen, whoever we is. We voted for people who didn't care about us. And our caring for ourselves seems to be so tribal that for the most part, not the total part, we've kind of excused ourselves from being responsible for everybody else. People come along once in a while and try to remind us of that. And we may be energized for a while, but it goes away. We've elected a bunch of young congresspeople who may interest the younger generation in voting and feeling an excitement about the future. And I hate to say it, but we've worked pretty hard to marginalize them. It looks like we're going to have an election that doesn't really speak to the future. And that is very sad. And some people want change and some people don't want change. At this point in my life, I don't know how much change I want. How much time do I have left? I've worked and struggled and strained, and I would say at this point, I'm relatively speaking prosperous. I have health, I have a few bucks, my kids are doing well, at least at the moment. What's my motivation? Well, my motivation has to be that I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and I believe that the world needs to be a better place, that we need to care for each other, that we need to all have the benefits that are available to all. If you remember, a few years ago, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book. And it was really written to his son about how dangerous it is to be an African American in the United States. And when he said that he was afraid for his physical body when he was outside, and he was trying hard to communicate to his son without frightening him what it meant to live in that kind of world. When I heard that, I was shocked, absolutely shocked. And then I said, wait a minute, I lived that. When I was a kid, it seemed like everybody knew I was a Jew. And people had something to say about it. I used to live down the street. We had moved to Eastern Queens, to this place called Rosedale, which is a very strange place. Bill Moyers did an hour-and-a-half documentary on it in the 70s because it was so racist and so, it was a tough place to live, but it was disguised as a nice place to live. If you fit in, you were okay. If you were an African American, you couldn't live there. If you were a Jew, we let a few in. And I had a neighbor, his name was Lou. Lou was a sanitation man. He was also the manager of my Little League team. I would walk by Lou's house 50 times a week. half of those times, if he was out, he would look at me and say to me, "You're a Jew, right?" And I would say, "Yeah, right, I am." I had no idea what that meant. I was maybe 12. So I went and asked my mother what that was, and I got the Nazi speech. And by this time, I was not a little kid. I kind of understood, and the world felt a lot less safe. And again, I have a certain level of privilege. I'm a man, I'm white, I can kind of stay out of the way. But I couldn't hide from that. And I made a decision at one point then that if somebody said something to me about being Jewish that was derogative, I was going to have to fight them. Because I was growing up in a kind of lower middle class environment. You couldn't let that pass. And I felt that if I did that enough, it would stop. And that is kind of what happened. But I looked to get out of it. And in many ways I did. I graduated to not having to care about it. Well, I feel now like I left behind a lot of folks who need to be cared about and to need to have people working toward a society where we're all equal, where we all have health care, where we all have food. You can go into the parking lot any day you want at ShopRite, Stop and Shop in Ossining, where a lot of the restaurants and some of the charities are giving away meals. There's hundreds and hundreds of people there. We are going to kill so many people through this pandemic. Now, again, it's a pandemic. We can't do anything. Well, we have charged government agencies to be ready for this. Every writer in the world has talked about it. Were we ready? No. I think at this point, and again, I have to thank our Minister Emeritus, Jim Covington. He sent a few of us an article yesterday, which made me change what I'm saying today. Because he wrote, it talked about Governor Cuomo and the dichotomy between him and our president. I never liked Governor Cuomo. I always felt he was an arrogant, nasty politician who cared about me as much as my desk cares about me. And he was the kind of guy that humiliated the mayor of New York City. He wanted you to know he was boss. Now here he is on TV every day telling us how we have to love everybody. We're going to care for every old person, which is me. I mean, I am grateful that people care that they're going to save my life. And I was really grateful for that. And when he talked about feeling uneasy when his kids weren't around because of how dangerous things are, well, Governor, think about how dangerous life is every day for so many people. We have the ability to care. We have what seems like the ability to transcend our baser instincts. We don't all have to be Mitch McConnell. We don't have to tell the states to drop dead. After this is over, we're going to be facing a period of time when there's going to be no money, a lot of people out of work. We have to begin to care for each other. And I have decided, rather than be fearful, which I really was having a very, very hard time, that I'm angry now. And I don't know how I'm going to do it or what exactly I'm going to do. But I'm going to dedicate myself, after I'm able to come out of the house reasonably safely, to trying to fix this, to try to get together with people and start to begin to model caring for everyone. Not just my own tribe, just not my own church, just not my own state, but everyone. We have the ability to transcend ourselves. And I'm hoping that we're able to do that. Blessed be.
Each week, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before us, those who, in their turn, gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with the SPCA of Westchester. Please refer to our website for more information. You can make your donation via credit card or PayPal using the links in your order of service. Please remember to give us a little extra to compensate for the 3% surcharge. Or if you prefer, you can always mail us a check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering, which is found in your order of service.